You know what it is, man. This is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the G Podcast. I appreciate y'all who tuned into the pre-show. This episode, we're going to focus on that other part of the Trinity: personal, professional, creative. I think that's very important for everyone to invest in each. There's a personal side of you, there's a professional side of you, and then there's a creative side. When you have that personal side, I would say those are all the things that you get to choose. The things you enjoy, religion, really anything personal to you. It could be your hobbies. It could relate to creative. It could relate to professional. But your personal decisions are more relationship based. It's about how you interact with people. So, how do you shape those personal relationships in the context of those 5 F's, the family, the friends? It's very personal. When you consider professional, well, very personal as well, in that you arguably spend more time regardless of what you do professionally. You arguably spend more time there than you do around the people you care about most. So that's a very important piece to the puzzle. It really is. And as it relates to the 5 F's, your professional life has a major impact, of course, on your finances. It also has a major impact on your perceived freedom. Some people have to work many hours where they literally don't have time to do nothing else but work and go to sleep, even on the weekends. Got to work multiple jobs. You don't have the freedom to just do as you want as often as you want. So your profession definitely impacts not only your finances, but your freedom, also future. We'll talk about the creative side on the next joint. And that creative side, what's interesting about that creative side is that it's like the queen on the chessboard. It does everything. You create all around you. That's the God within. We have to get in that to a whole different topic. But while we're here, if there's anything that brings you as close to God that I can think of, it's your ability to create. That is the ultimate gift. How do you invest your time to create? From a professional standpoint, you have to create a career for yourself. You can't just settle for what's already been laid out necessarily. While at the same time, you have to understand, I think, a very key question. Do you know who you are? Or are you or are you too busy trying to be who you want to be? That's different. Sometimes who you want to be and who you are, sometimes those things align. Kobe, MJ, LeBron. You don't think it's other out there that don't want to be Kobe, MJ, or LeBron and still hooping, tearing their ACLs at age 35 to this day? Come on, man. So, knowing who you are versus who you want to be, and that's where that idea of friction versus flow is so important in your professional world, because you don't have a lot of time to waste dealing with friction. But it's tough when you don't necessarily know who you are. Furthermore, it's tough to know who you are when you haven't really had much exposure. Mm-hmm. What is exposure? When I grew up, I know I can say confidently, when I was in college, I wasn't thinking about grad school. I wasn't thinking about internships. I didn't do anything to say pursue a professional career, if you will. Really had no clue. And as I said before on a prior episode, when you're at that early age of up to like 23, 24, early 20s, a, 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 a major portion of your existence is due to things well beyond your control. It's due to your parents, your family, your schools, the things that you don't get to choose. You just have to deal with them. And when you have circumstances which prepare you for stages of life via exposure, you tend to matriculate just a little smoother. So the idea of friction versus flow from a professional standpoint is unique because very often when it's time to enter the professional environment, you don't necessarily enter on who you are and your merit. You don't. You enter based off of an accumulation of what your environment has been able to help you get to, you see. Now, I don't think that's the case for 100%, but pretty close. Because even the outliers, it wasn't their decision to be that outlier. And they miraculously turn water into wine. You don't get to choose the cards you're dealt, is the ultimate takeaway. So how do you play your hand? That's what being, say, a child or a young person is about. Understanding how to play the game. Because you don't get to always choose. Things won't always go according to plan. But you don't necessarily have to have a full house every hand to stay in the game. It's about staying in the game sometimes. Professionally, if you don't know who you are and you spent all of this time chasing after something that you think you want to be, that can be a very hurtful reckoning. And I know this from speaking to numerous people personally. I know this. That sort of reckoning that you've put all this time and energy into something that has drove you into depression, anxiety, medications, all in the name of having a career is so unfortunate. And so I think it's important to really try to pursue the idea of challenging, like, who are you versus who do you want to be? Because are you too fixated on the idea of who you are, or are you tapped in with what you really are? That's something different. You can set yourself up for more success when you understand who you are and how you thrive. You won't be looking for the friction. You'll be looking for the flow. But it's tough to even have that approach if you don't know. So, do you know who you are? Got to take just a brief pause. Kinship, conniption. Dry martini with a twist, man. What a fly bottle. Just some fly craftsmanship. I don't know what the hell butterfly pea flower is, but that's some great marketing. I don't know what the that is, though. Butterfly pea flower. Is that do they even have butterfly peas? I don't know. Either way, bottle is super fly. Purple drink. Durham Distillery. Shout out to them. Shout out to Corpse. All right, so how I tie into all those things, I can just share my perspective. As I shared in the prior episode, I understood, for me, the idea of partnership was so crucial to maximizing this time. I don't think that this is designed to go through without a partner. That's what I do. And sometimes those partners come in different forms and fashions, but that's why I'm so big on that institution of marriage. We'll have to talk about that over different episodes, but marriage is so powerful. It's so powerful. And I pursued it as a priority, especially when I knew I had something worth doing that for. It's one thing to waste your time pursuing it for the wrong reasons, but when you know, like we talked about on the last episode, so not we won't get into that. But for me personally, that's where the foundation stood. And so how I approached my career when I met my wife at the time, I was in a place where mentally, this is literally where I was. I had no desire to ever move away from North Carolina. I had no desire to go back to school at all. I'm not a fan of school. If I didn't get into Winston-Salem State, I don't know what would have happened because I didn't get into nowhere else. So shout out to Winston-Salem State University. So good. Oh, man. Shout out to Winston-Salem State. So when it comes to my professionalism, it's all rooted in the fact that when I met my wife, I, again, had never left anywhere, didn't want to go anywhere, and I had a genuine joy for what I did. Did it make a lot of money? Hell nah. But working with who I had the opportunity to work with over that time span was so enriching. Again, I worked at a nonprofit agency, and that nonprofit agency had programs that are funded through, state funded programs, federally funded programs. Upward Bound, you may have heard of something like this, Talent Search. And I had an opportunity to work in these Upward Bound and Talent Search programs with students in Durham County, Edgecombe County. Shout out to the 919. Shout out to the 252. I learned so much in that time period. It was priceless. And that really taught me the tug and pull of reality early on, because there's showing up, getting something of value out of what you do in a way that fulfills you. But then there's getting that paycheck and it makes you mad than a motherfucker, boy. Mad than a motherfucker. You be like, what in the world? So I understand it. Teachers are wildly underpaid. People who work with children are just wildly underpaid in general. And it takes, and people who work with the elderly. Let me shout them out.
Wow.
A lot of respect for those who work with the elderly. Those who work for the less fortunate, people of service. So underpaid, so underpaid. But yet, those are the real professionals, in my opinion. People who do things of service. We live in a capitalist society, so service has a twist. That's not to say there are people out there who sacrifice the funds for the fulfillment. I did that very much early on, but I have to admit it was for the wrong reasons. And here's why. It's one thing to pursue something because you're deeply passionate about it. It's another to not pursue something. Step back time. I need a sip. It's one thing to pursue. Nah. When it comes to making a living, did you pursue too much recreational? Left me. It'll probably come back, but to pursue your professional dreams. I wish I knew exactly what I was saying. Either way, let me get back to this point. When you don't understand who you are, you can easily make the wrong career choice. And then when you don't have the right level of exposure, it's going to make it more likely you don't understand who you are. And so for me, not only did it take a longer path to understand and get exposed, it's like I did that intentionally because I prioritized other things along the way. Part of that was due to my circumstances. And so, with me prioritizing personal and tailoring a professional life around how I build my life with my partner, this is where I say I'm a unicorn in that if I'm building with my partner, I don't feel a need like most people who would have met my wife at that time. She had a fellowship that required her for being in the foreign service for 3 years. And if she would have left, she would have to pay back the money. So she was going to stay there for 3 years. Be clear. So upon meeting her, she hadn't even started. She was finishing up grad school. That meant upon meeting her, I knew she was going to be in this worldwide organization for 3 years. That's not the most ideal pursuit of a career, somewhere where you don't have a lot of control. And so building the idea of accepting that reality was something that was probably the most difficult because I had literally no clue what I was going to end up doing along the way. And so I just want to share little decisions that had major impacts along the way professionally at that point because I had no clue what I was going to do. I had at that point was working in the nonprofit realm, started working at the School of Science and Math, North Carolina School of Science and Math. Shout out to the unis. Wow. Hey, man, some gifted gifted minds that I had an opportunity to meet while working there, which was a boarding school um, in North Carolina. And when we talk about exposure, this idea of exposure, I live in Durham, born and raised. I don't know how old I was until I knew that thing on 9th Street over there off Broad and Club Boulevard was arguably the best high school in the state, if not one of the best in the whole country, right there in the whole backyard. No clue.
No.
And so when I ended up working there due to a friend, in large part, definitely hooked me up with that opportunity to get interviewed and get that. So exposure. When I was in high school, where those students were at that point in life, I didn't even know it existed. But yet there they were. I don't think, as an example, you can end up at a high school like that without having a very strong something getting you there along the way. It just don't fall into those types of opportunities. We'll have to talk about that in more detail later. I was there. I had a great time. All the young men who were on that hall, I mean, an exceptional bunch. And I ended up getting an opportunity to move on the border, Nuevo Laredo, Texas. Literally, where I'm crossing the border every day back and forth to go to work. I go from not ever leaving the country to being in Nuevo Laredo, Texas, crossing the border back and forth every single day to go to work. Why? All because of her. I just took what came with her. I'm telling you, expectations kill a lot of your experiences when you prioritize what you want and don't put constraints in the form of expectations around how that's going to look. But do you have the thing you want? It's different. And when you don't know who you are, and then you say you want something, and then you get it, but you weren't ready for what you asked for because you didn't know who you were, even though you knew that's what you wanted. It's about, like I said at the beginning, do you know who you are versus who you want to be? Do y'all watch Married at First Sight? If you do, go ahead and drop that in the comments, man. Definitely a popular show, something that me and wifey watch. And you see it all the time on that show as an example. People sign up claiming they want this type of partner, and then they get that type of partner. What happens? I'll wait. They find out it's a little bit different when you get what you ask for. And so, working at that university in Laredo, Texas, Texas A&M International. Shout out to the Dust Devils. Hey man, just on a complete side note, if you've never been to the border, it's different. It's mad different. I haven't been to many places where if you go to a Walmart of all places, can you imagine being in a Walmart and you literally don't see not one other black person? But that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. You don't even see what I would call even another white person. When I moved to the border, that's a whole nother story. I'm on a tangent now. This is when I found out more about the Hispanic diaspora, the Chicanos, the unique culture of that 30-mile radius right there along the border too is different too. It's a whole different type of Spanish even. And so what I found out moving down there for the first, I had never heard this before. This is when my mind was like, one, Nuevo Laredo and Laredo is like a skip and a jump across a river. It's not a far distance at all. These are adjacent towns with just a river in between that you can easily get across multiple points. But when I would tell a local person in Laredo that I was crossing that border back and forth and living in the Nuevo Laredo, that was a place they never went. The perception they had on it was just so unique to me because this is where I'm living. I'm like, oh, now don't get me wrong, man. It's interesting down there. It's unique. But what I also learned was that was the first time I had ever heard of someone being Hispanic referring to themselves as white. I didn't know that you could do that. I had no clue you could do that. I was like, oh man, these been cheating this whole time. This whole time they've been cheating. Because then you stretch that out. It's like if you are from more Hispanic influenced communities, that's a very common thing. The Hispanic community will often identify on a document as white. I think that's why they make us check that other box before they let you know if you a or not. They say, are you Hispanic or nah? That's the first question. Yo, America crazy, but I see what's going on. Let me get back to the profession, man, so we can get out of here because while I enjoyed my time on the border, it was limited. When I moved down there, I lived there for maybe 9 months. And at the time of moving down there, I want to say I knew we were headed to Amsterdam next. And even then, a lesson was learned because I thought that something would happen a certain way based off of information that was given to us, but it didn't happen that way. And so what ended up happening was when you're in the foreign service, or at least at the time, when you're a spouse to someone in the foreign service, there are some unique benefits to that role, especially when you live apart. They'll send your spouse checks. Like this is like a whole other lifestyle vibe. The foreign service is a career vibe. I'd love to get some of y'all on just to talk about how you've progressed throughout your foreign service career. But outside of that, when we were leaving Mexico, we thought that there will be opportunities to do stuff in Amsterdam at the consulate there for me professionally. Before we even left Mexico, we were going to be in DC we knew we were going to be in DC for at least 8-9 months before going over to the Netherlands, which is another just like random time period. It's like very hard to figure out what you're going to do professionally when you're not even one place for so short of a time. And so at that time period, I just was looking at everything, and my partner was looking at everything as well. Very, very helpful to see what were the options. Just what are the options? Before we even left Mexico, we found out that option we thought was no longer going to be the case. Everything had changed. Now I got to go take this test. Got to go learn about these old white folks that I don't know nothing about, no U.S. history, mumbo jumbo, Constitution jumbo. Like, I'm not a foreign service officer. Like, so I had to go through an experience that was strictly because of the partner I chose, period. And you never know how at the time what it leads to, but I ended up being in a situation where we came across a University of Amsterdam. And then the idea of like, well, what if you go to school, because we'll be there for 2 years? Could be a good use of time to go to school while being over there versus some other stuff. Ended up interviewing. I had an offer to work at the embassy in The Hague, Den Haag, for the ambassador at the time. But I also was studying to take the GRE, took the GRE, applied to school, and was waiting to hear back to see if I get accepted. Ended up getting accepted, and now I have a decision to make. Do I spend my time here working to get a check, or do I know what's best for me long term, which based off prior experiences trying to do other things, it's like, man, yeah, no, a master's would be very beneficial. And so, boom, said, we just gonna go after the master's, turned down the job, went all in as a student. Man, and I hate being a student, okay? That was such a tough time for me. Being a student at an older, like I had been out of school at that point for over 5 years or so, or around 4 or 5 years. I'm in a whole new country. Everything's legal. And I'm supposed to be in school every day. Like, come on, man. Come on, man. So, long story short, I got accepted into a master's in economics. And then failed by the first semester. I couldn't pass one class. That shit was crazy. Okay. When I tell you a was humbled, I mean humbled. All right. And Unique, the Dutch, really helped me develop due to the exposure. Because this is the one place where a teacher ever told me, hey, look, I went to the teacher and was like, I don't understand it. He was like, look, I don't think this is for you. You need to go do something else. He's like,
it doesn't matter how you feel.
Got it. That's how they talk to people here. Interesting. The Netherlands was different, but it taught me a lot. It also taught me a lot about myself because I pivoted. I didn't stop. I still knew I needed that master's. So it wasn't economics. Just moved over to the School of Business, studied international business, ended up finding success. And then when I came back to North Carolina, I had an opportunity to go back to the nonprofit that I had always worked with. But when me and my wife left Amsterdam, the whole reason we left was because at that point, she had figured out that that was not for her, that career and everything. And people would probably be like, man, why would y'all ever do it? You got to understand who you are, what works for you, and what you need to be fulfilled. It's going to be different for every person. But if you don't know who you are, it's tough. And then if you're too busy comparing what you do to what other people do and what you make to what other people make and how you live to how other people live, it's like going to be very, very difficult to get the most out of your professional life because the mind won't be right. So you got to know who you are and you got to know why you do what you do. When we came back, we had a goal, or I had a goal. And I told her at the time, I said, I need to go back here. I'm going to work here for maybe 2 years. And then I'm going to what was RTP. But here's the thing, even about exposure. I grew up in this area, Durham. I've always heard the term RTP, Research Triangle Park. But yet I never had a clue of what the it really was, other than T.W. Alexander. No other clue what it was. Just some buildings. But the adult version, once you start understanding like these companies, and it's a lot of money in RTP, a lot of money. And it's only grown in recent years. The amount of logos have only increased. I don't know how much. It's just, it's a booming area. You could go Google. It's crazy. And so the fact that I grew up here and never really had connections to that or aspirations to get there, and those were great opportunities that were right in my backyard. RTP, School of Science and Math. It's the exposure sometimes, it'll be right in your own radius and you don't even get exposed to something that could have made a big difference. That's a shame. And so RTP is where I ended up. And one of the things that I learned immediately being in that corporate environment was, one, I made a mistake years ago by avoiding this. And I think I'm getting back to that original point. Oh my gosh. Oh man, it came full circle. Oh, give it up for G. I avoided corporate. I avoided it out of fear, out of my standards. When in reality, my gifts and my business acumen were always tailor suited for that environment. And I didn't put myself there intentionally. That was my mistake. And so I pursued that nonprofit journey, and I knew who I was, but where I made the mistake was that I didn't even give myself the option to pursue something else as well to see how that may have worked. It was a self-limiting belief. I just didn't even pursue it at all. I was like, corporate. Didn't put in no apps, no nothing. So it's like, do you do your job because you don't expect that you'll do anything else, or that you have certain reasons why you won't try to do anything else? Or why is it that you do what you do? And then when you look at what you do, how does it help you as it relates to those F's? And in terms of how I got here, when I look at my career, started in that nonprofit world, working with students, so many different backgrounds, different cultures, and giving me an opportunity to figure things out without a lot of resources. You had to be resourceful. So I do appreciate that experience. And it also gave me an opportunity to understand different backgrounds from a unique perspective. Working at science and math, very similar, but it taught me that those kids are just the same as the others. Yeah, they smart as hell. That is very true. Not saying the others aren't. Them science and math kids is different. Not even gonna lie to you. When it comes to the who they are, though, all the same. All the same. Being on the border, one of very few black folks, often the only black person if you go certain places, or if you go many places. I did find one random barber in Laredo who was from Raleigh. Crazy. I don't know if that dude is still out there in Laredo cutting hair, but good looks. I saw there too, like, wow, I don't know as much as I thought I knew. Like, just learned so much about a different culture, even though I'm still in the US, if you will. Like, I'm on the border. It's a different world. Being in grad school in Amsterdam set me up in a way where I came back with a different asset that I didn't have, and I had an opportunity to just sharpen my sword. Had to complete a master's program, and I had to fail one to bounce back to get it done. I could have quit. I could have not continued, but it's about understanding who you are and why you do what you do. Nothing's easy, but why are you doing it? And is it rewarding for you? The idea of this corporate world, I don't think it's for everybody. But what I will say is that there are a lot of individuals from underserved communities who don't even know how great they would be in that setting. They have the natural interpersonal skills, and they would be a great fit, especially in the world of tech, and where what I know from my own personal experience is the world of software sales. Gonna have to get a few of you on to talk in more detail. But that world of software sales, man, it's so many young black males who could be doing that if they wanted to, but they don't even know. And that's not to say you can't do anything else. It's just about exposing you to some things you didn't even know about. Because what I do now professionally, I had no clue about as a kid. Furthermore, I had no clue about when I was in college. I had no clue about when I had met my wife. I had no clue. And so I think that makes me feel good, and that I didn't prioritize going after something that I just really had no clue about. And who knows what's next? Because we here at the G Podcast.
Wow.
And so with my professional background, all it's done is just help me sharpen my patience while giving me the ability to lock in on the moment. Taking things one step at a time. Making the next best decision versus thinking, I know where exactly I'm going to end up. Because when you make a lot of really good small decisions, your outcome might be beyond what you could have even predicted. And currently, I work in an industry that I never would have predicted. My background in learning and development, I leverage in a corporate space. It's the perfect intertwining. It's unique. It's something that literally didn't exist, like podcast at the time, right? All of this sort of comes together. And so that's how the professional part of me gets me to this point, because it's all about the moment and knowing what I need to do now versus assuming I know what's coming later. And if I spend more moments focused on me, not others, and what others are doing or making or how they're living, if I don't use that as a measuring stick, I'm in better shape because I'm focused on me in my lane. So I would encourage everyone to really focus in on why you do what you do. And do you know who you are versus who you want to be? Because when you know who you are, regardless of the circumstances, you can live with those because you did it your way. But when you don't really understand who you are and you're chasing this idea of who you want to be or who someone else wanted you to be, you're going to be so unfulfilled and lost along that journey, in my opinion. It's all about understanding who you are and honoring that. That's it. This went way longer than expected. Jeez Louise. This is the G Podcast.
Final system check for re-entry.